and on the drop down, which says, on mine, it says all panelists and attendees. Some people, evidently, it says everyone. And just say hi. I'm Kathy from Evanston, Illinois. And hi, Leah from Michigan. See, Leah's already done it. And Emily from Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. Welcome. Great to see you. We have about 30 seconds before we're going to get started. So would like everybody to kind of just come in and say hi. Hi, Rose in Indiana. And Deb from Colorado. Calais from LA. Nice to see you. It rhymes. Hi, Tammy from Pennsylvania. Jennifer from Virginia. And it's 12 o'clock. So hi, Sandra. I'm glad you got here. And hi, Katie from Illinois. Let's go to the next slide. Jahira's in the background, and I'm here today with Yoli Maya. Welcome, Yoli.
Thank you.
And this is the fourth in the webinar series, Accessing Our Emotions, Exploring Rhythm, Time, and the Natural World. This is a series on grief, and today is class 4, the sadness of grief. So Jahira's launched the poll. Were you here at our last webinar with Yoli? Just or any of the grief webinars? If you could just let us know. We'll see how many new people we have. Hi, Maria from Massachusetts. And while you're filling out the poll, I will remind you of our ways to engage. Oh, Calais says you've been a favorite, Yoli.
Thank you.
It's awesome. You have a fan, at least.
Yay.
Ways to engage. I mean, mostly in Yoli does a very interactive session. But her interactivity is with you doing some work on the floor, mostly, So, but if you should need to say something, you could have 2 options. You can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. And you're already practicing the chat. So wonderful. The next thing is that in recognition that we create the sacred space together for us to learn and grow and be vulnerable and experience ourselves. Next slide, Jahira. We ask that you agree to these agreements like Emily has done. So we ask if you're going to speak, that you speak from your own experience, that you treat other people the way you want to be treated. And for this one especially, full presence, no multitasking, because you're not going to get any value at all unless you're like really here now with Yoli. So I see a lot of agreement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yoli, and I'm going to go off camera till the end. And welcome you all, and welcome Yoli, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back, friends. So this is 4 of a 5-part series. The general theme is about accessing our emotions, tools, actual things we can do to move emotional energy in the body, to cycle it, and to also initiate a transformative process. So let's go to the next slide. So we've been looking at centering in on grief because it's so pertinent right now. It's so relevant in so many ways that when we think about grief, often grief is a taboo. It's not something that we talk about. It's something that we try to just quickly cycle through and get to the end of, and in that thinking that there's an end to it. And what I want to bring us into is a reimagining that grief, like all emotions, are cyclic. And they interface with our psychology, with the way our mind, our emotions, our intellect, our imaginations function. But so long emotions stay in their own little bucket and mental function stays in its own bucket, we're never going to really tap into this amazing potential that the body is the meeting place for us to engage, to heal, to transform, and thus the potential that we arrive to a space of possibility that we couldn't have even imagined. And so, what I wanted to imagine with all of you is that grief is actually a superpower. So here we are spending most of our lives, because we're culturally conditioned that way, to avoid grief. But what if we could reframe our whole way of thinking and equip ourselves with practical breath and movement and meditative tools that support us embracing, in fact, all emotions, but then particularly this grief thing. So this is a model that is in the heart of Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine. Now, you may access East Asian medicine because you go and you get acupuncture from someone, or Chinese herbs, or you receive hands on body treatment in the form of shiatsu or Reiki, energy healing. But then there's also things like you may enjoy green tea, black tea, right? Those also have some origins in those parts of the world, as well as what about martial arts practices or things we might learn in the form of health and rejuvenative practice like qigong or tai chi, right? Something I love to do, which is called Dao Yin, which is like chi building practices and sort of cleansing the pipes. And so I'm sharing some practices in these workshops, in these webinars that are right along those lines. They really are self-healing practices that move us through these 5 phases. And the reason they're not called 5 elements is because these aren't so much physical substances as they are aspects of time. So here we are in the depths of winter. Now, I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm still looking at a couple of feet of snow outside, and it's a gray sky today. It's pretty wintry out there. And that season is associated with the water phase. Maybe in your imagination, you can think about the frozen waterfall. Or here we have a very large lake that's frozen over, right? Or the stream, small body of water that freezes in winter. So when we go deep into the winter state, we tend to have emotional dip, a little bit more towards sadness, depression. Another key emotion that we experience in the water phase, right, is fear. And fear is a very deep human experience. Now, I had the chance to give a webinar, I think it was December. So if you go back to the Be Strong website and you scroll through the catalog of things, I'm pretty sure this webinar was in December, where I talked about very specifically an axis, AXIS, axis of fear and joy. And that's this connection of water and fire. So today, we're all about going into the water phase and the sadness of grief. So grief typically is associated with the metal phase. And what we're doing is traversing the path that looks like a 5-pointed star, where we started with metal and we went into the sorrow of grief, grief as grief itself, and then we traveled to wood, the anger of grief, to earth, the worry of grief, all these expressions. Today we're coming to the water phase, the sadness of grief. And where are we going to end up in a couple of weeks? Our very last one, this very exciting prospect of the joy of grief in the fire phase, right? So again, we're talking about a transformative process that this experience of grief is dynamic, it's changing, right? So let's go to the next slide. So just to give ourselves a little centering here, this is a short haiku by a very special person to me, Melinda Morris Perrin. I call her my goddess Ma. She's my godmother and one of my very important spiritual teachers and connection to Native American teaching. And she is the poet laureate of Schenectady, New York. And this is one of her very short poems, a haiku called Sorrow by Melinda Perrin. Sorrow, joy, and woe, woven in winter's ice webs, fall to earth and melt. Let's go to the next slide. So, transformative process, ever changing. So, this image I love. This is your classic 5 steps of the grief process. And what I love about what this image presents, not only because there's color there, and I just love everything with color, is it's showing us movement and transformation, right? It's showing us a dynamic process where we may start at the initial shock, panic, denial, that initial neural response of a traumatic experience where we typically will pause somewhere in a fight, flight, freeze mode, right? And then moving through some of the common expressions of our emotions as we move through the process. Coming up towards rage and anger, swooping down towards depression, shame, and just the stigma. And we're kind of in that blue zone today, as well as we sort of meld these two systems, this Western view and this Eastern view, that sadness of grief, I would say, is one of the more commonly acknowledged expressions of grief. The sorrow, the winter experience itself, just like that haiku, the falling, the inward turning, the closing, right? So just kind of thinking of those themes, like as we see them in nature, as we are part and parcel of nature. So we kind of swoop down, and then we kind of see like a guilt, a recovery guilt, like I'm still here, I'm feeling, and I'm guilty, or, depending on what the loss is. Keep in mind, we can also be talking about intergenerational grieving, right? The grieving of our ancestors, the grieving, of our inherited traumas, right? And then we kind of swoop over here, now we're in the orange zone of acceptance, right? And just kind of keeping in mind that like it can keep cycling even in this process. And I love what's in the center of this image: joy and love, empathy and hope, right? That at any moment in time, so if this weren't a figure 8, but it was just a grand circle, like a medicine wheel, that there are moments where we can move, transform, spiral, swing from sadness to joy, from anger to worry, right? From sorrow back to joy. And I think in that way, grief can feel quite emotionally schizophrenic at times, right? That like, what's the weather report today? Where am I? And that's okay, right? Because if we had a framework for grief that wasn't something to get done, right? If we had a framework for grief that was cyclic, that was spirally, then we might be more open to the spiral dance itself, knowing that we're in a process that doesn't necessarily have an end date, right? But then maybe we're wondering, right? Because many of us are in this space right now who are grieving, who are actively grieving many, many different things, right? But I want it to end. Like, give me a date and time. I want to be free from the suffering. The thing about cycles is every time you revisit a path that you've walked before, you learn something new. You see something new. You experience a greater depth. So if grief is a superpower, then every time we revisit even a painful something, it could be also like greeting an old friend. It's just something to think about it. I don't mean it just so much in a poetic sense, but maybe just in a deeply spiritual sense. So just something to kind of ponder a little bit about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're back in this 5-phase thing, and we have 2 ways of interrelating in this model. One is to go around the outside circle. Metal to water, water to wood, wood to fire, fire to earth, earth back to metal. That's called the creation cycle. So today we're hanging out in water, and we can see that metal comes before water. That makes metal the mother of wood, of water, and water's the mother of wood. So that shows us a certain interrelating of relationships. And some of you who have been coming to this webinar for a few times now, might be getting the hang of this 5-phase model, at least in the way that we're working with. Say, well, does that make Earth the grandmother of water? Yes, it does. Is wood the child of water? Yes, it is, right? So when we start playing with this model and we think about the generational and intergenerational relating, that's like a whole nother fun way of utilizing this tool, right? Now, then we had the movement between, right? The 5-pointed star in between, and that's called the control cycle. Because if this in theory were only about growth and expansion, then how would we ever get things contained in a way, for example, in this body? So this principle reflects the core philosophy of yin yang, of expansion and contraction, right? That the goal isn't all light. The goal is the interface, the interplay of light and dark, of expansion and contraction, right? We're not in a moral zone. We're not saying good and bad. That's a different area. That's an area for morals. Right now, we're talking about nature, really, and time. Now, if we zero in on that water bubble, and what we see there are 2 organs, organ networks, or energy channels in this body, and what the water phase governs is kidney and bladder channels, and those are found in the back body. So for example, we're not talking a lot about pathology or symptoms in this series, but this is the backbone of an entire medical system called classical Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine. And when we look at pathologies of the water phase, for example, something all of us experience in the wintertime is a little bit more low back tightness, or the onset of creaky knees, right? It's like when we come into the cold of winter and the waterways are frozen, right? Think about your channels. They're filled with liquid, they're filled with fluid, right? And the fluid goes a little bit more towards its solid state when we have cold. So what did all our ancestors do? Well, they built saunas and hot baths and went to hot springs and, did hot treatments, heat treatments in winter. What do we do nowadays? We snuggle under electric blankets, or if you can, you crank the heat up, kind of thing. So, with that kind of thinking, this kind of imagery, we can see that the sadness of grief, that morose, heavy, falling energy, you may be experiencing the sadness of grief in the form of knee pain and low back pain, constriction in the back of the neck where the head meets the neck, for example. So when we're introducing what we've been building in our practice across these webinars of these therapeutic movements that circulate and move, yes, energy in channels, but quite possibly more technically fluid in fluid filled spaces. So once again, when we have more cold or static influence, that fluid in those fluid spaces in the body becomes more solid-like. Its solid form is gel. When we have good movement of fluid in fluid spaces, that fluid is more viscous. It's more fluid-like. Okay? And so this is what you want to pay attention to when we do these movements, the feeling of flow, activation, right? If we want to move emotional energy, if we want to move grief energy in its natural transformative process, this body is the meeting place. And other things that we've also enjoyed exploring is emotions must express. So let's go to the next slide. So find in here water right in the middle there, and then just go all the way down to the bottom to the expression. The expression of water is moaning. Think if you've ever been on a wooden boat. I mean, kind of like a ship, though, not like a rowboat. Yeah, I spend time on like wooden Viking ships, you know what I mean? And when you're out on a body of water and you're moving, you'll hear like the boat moans a little bit. It creaks and moans. You know what else creaks and moans? Your joints in wintertime, right? You wake up and you're like, click, clack, brick, brack, like everything starts clicking into place, and you kind of feel better, right? When you have that little release, that's like a little moaning of the joints, right? You can also think about like this common expression, so we have the emotion of fear, sadness we described. What is like a common way of crying, right? Do we cry like this? Like we're just flailed out, like, kind of thing? No, most of the time, what do? We fetal position ourselves. We really close in. And that sort of positioning of protecting the front body and opening up the back body, that's very much an intuitive way of accessing the water phase in the body, the kidney and bladder channels in the back body. It's totally intuitive. And then you've had that big cry and that loud cry, and then what do you do for a while? You moan, right? Once you've had kind of the big, like wood expression, right? Then where you come into is, or if you are blessed with children in the house, and wow, these people are really stressed right now in this ongoing, pandemic environment, and they go and they'll have the loud cry, but then the majority of the time will actually be spent in the moaning crying, right? And what's happening in that moment in time is an intuitive, built-in response, a pre-programmed response of our neural endocrine system to self-regulate. So just like we invited in the weeping of the metal, the singing, remember, of the earth. We'll get to the fire, the laughing bit, right? The moaning of the water and the shouting. Remember, we did shouting practice during the wood phase because this is how these emotions express and then get into this cyclic resolution, right? And you can see on this chart that there are, there's colors associated, there's sense organs and senses, there's tastes. So these are all ways that we could support the nurturing, right? Yes, sometimes we use these in a diagnostic way, but that I would say for now, maybe shy away from that and just kind of use this chart more as a resource. One thing I do want to point out that we will address in our practice today is fatigue. It's like raise your hand if you're tired, right? And so even like me, the purveyor of restful spaces, even today, I woke up this morning and it's just like, wow, this tired struggle is real. I can hear it in my voice. It's a little more gravelly. Think water phase. Like it gets gravelly is the word, a bit grumbly. You start going down a few octaves and the voice doesn't have clarity to it. It's actually a sign of fatigue. The battery's running empty. As well as look at the time of day, 3 to 5 p.m. for the bladder channel. That is so common, especially in a 9 to 5 work environment, or 8 to 6 is more like it these days. That's when the energy dips, right? And what do most people do then? They reach for caffeine or sugar, right? And what that's doing is revving the engine. But really, what your body wanted you to do is to even take 5 or 10 minutes of an efficient rest experience. Now, I've done another webinar, and I think that was in September for this series, that was all about using yoga nidra, deep relaxation meditation, to support your need for restfulness in this extraordinary, ongoing, trialsome time. Like this is like, running a big long marathon kind of thing. And so one of our practices today will also be to bring and rest our bones in a little divine rest, right? So bones are water phase. That's the water phase part of the body. So you can kind of see like these poetic themes, these human experiences, and the ways that we have sayings and expressions. They're not out of nowhere. They're not without a logic. The logic is the natural world itself. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this one is just a little bit of a reference when I'm talking about these channels. There's a system of the channels. Today we're working really in the back body. That's the kidney and bladder channels, 2 very long channels. This is just, for your reference, but it's also just, I don't know, kind of cool. And where we ever started with all these practices of deep belly breathing, all these channels converge in the abdomen. And so deep belly breathing is a way to regulate all the energy channels in the body, in this map that we're looking at here, the meridian chart. Okay, next slide. So this will be our last slide, and then we're going to do stuff. So these are the exercises, these are the therapeutic movements that I've been sharing with you in this series. Each time we repeat the ones that we've done before. So we'll do almost all of the, we'll be doing 1, 2, 3, 4 of the movements here. We'll start with the metal standing, and then we'll come to the floor and we'll do earth, and then we're going to do water, and then we're going to do wood. And when we have our last webinar, we'll have 2 more movements to add in, because in this system, there are not 2 fire channels, but 4 fire channels. And who knows, so many reasons of why we can interpret that, but let's just say so much joy, so much potential, right? We need 4 channels. So lots to get to in our next session as well. Okay, so we're going to pause here, and what I'm going to ask you to do if you want to delight in the movement is we're going to stand up, and we're going to start with just this little kind of wiggly, shaky practice for a minute or so that gets fluid moving in fluid spaces and gives us a little point of reference for what does it feel like when fluid is moving. Tingly, warm, right? Heat, remember, because cool has us more towards solid, heat has us more towards fluid, right? And it's a therapeutic practice in its own right. And then we'll do these stretches, we'll come to the floor, and hopefully today I've saved a little bit more time than what we've usually had to do a little short yoga nidra, a little micro nidra of rejuvenation. All right, that's our plan. So let's go ahead and stand up. And I'm gonna move our little rig a wee bit back. That ought to do it. Okay, so in my standing position, I've got some space between my feet. My knees are bent. My hips are loose. So a little bit of space, knees bent, hips nice and loose. And I'm going to generate a little bounce with my bent knees. You want the weight to go back into the hips and glutes, like if we were going to do a squat, as opposed to towards your knees. And we're just using this movement to wiggle and jiggle, which means you kind of got to let it go. let it wiggle and jiggle a little. And what we want to find is a nice little even tempo. Not too fast, not too slow. And then I'm just feeling into my body and seeing, like, where are places that feel loose, where are places that are feeling a bit solid. And I breathe into some of those places, and I'm just seeing, can I arrive to a place where this bouncing becomes nearly effortless. This could be a really good, like when you want to take a break from the screen, from sitting, little Zoom fatigue moment. Stand up and do this for like 2 minutes. And while you're doing it, look around. Like, expand your spatial awareness. Could even be to the corners of the room. If you have a window that you could look outside of. And you know what else you could do? You can imagine. So I'm about a mile away from Lake Michigan, but I can imagine the lake. And my spatial awareness goes that big. And if I'm going to go that far, then let me go a mile to my left as well. And maybe I'm just imagining like trees in a forest that way. Same thing, front, back. And I'm just connecting. And that's going to help move some of this energy in the body as well. So these channels are filled with fluid. Remember, we're 78% water. Fluid. What's in those fluid-filled spaces? They're called interstitial spaces. Nutrients. Blood, synovial fluid in the joints, right? All nourishing substances. Just kind of checking into my neck here. And today, really give a little feel into your back body. Pretty guaranteed you're going to notice stiffness. somewhere. Could be a lot of somewheres. Now start to slow down and come all the way to a stop. And if it delights you, close your eyes. You don't have to, but just feel inside and feel. What do you feel? Warmth, tingly, flow? Might be a couple of places that like just aren't flowing in the same way as the whole body. Take note. And while you're here, just drop the breath down to the belly. Let's take a couple of breaths to the belly. Breathe in, belly gets big. Breathe out, belly relaxes. 2 more. Beautiful diaphragmatic breathing. So supportive, so healing this breath. Nice. All right, let's move into these movements. So we're going to start with the movement that accesses the metal phase in the form of the channels of lung and large intestine. Those run on the top of the arm. Lung channel to the lungs. Large intestine channel will come up to the face. I've explained in a couple of the other webinars that the concept of these channels, it's not exclusive to the organ. The organ is part of the channel, but like, is your large intestine in your cheek? It is not. It's way down here, right? So remember these are network channels that there's an interfacing of the large intestine, but not a direct correlation to the organ. Because sometimes, people will come into the clinic space and you're like, oh, your heart meridian, is a little deficient in its energy flow. They're like, oh my God, something's wrong with my heart. So that's not how this system works, right? So we're thinking more about a whole network. So lung and large intestine are both up here, metal face. So what do we want to do? We want to open up the chest, right? That's the general trajectory of the movement. And each of these channels we're elongating and stretching, okay? So what you may do with your hands is loop the thumb and stretch to the index finger because the channels run through those fingers. That's not a have to, it's just if it's comfortable. Little space between the feet, soft knees. You'll hold that behind you. Inhale, a little stretch through those index fingers. And then as you fold forward, keep stretching through the index fingers. Now we've shown before that we can modify by holding something behind us. I don't know why I just chose a 5-pound weight. Don't do that. But something more like a piece of fabric or a sock or a towel or a yoga band. You know what I'm thinking about? Yoga belt, those things, just to give your shoulders a bit more space and fold forward. And then now if you're holding your thumbs, go ahead, come up, switch the thumbs, breathe in. Exhale, forward fold. What's most important is your breath. Breathe to the chest. Three to 5 slow breaths. And you may be thinking, hey, I can't breathe. My belly is squeezing. My arms are tight. You're just going to do your best, right? And you don't have to stay in something that's not working for you at all. Maybe an alternative to even folding forward would just be to open up the chest and breathe, and maybe even just stretch through the index fingers. Bring your awareness to the channels and breathe through there, right? So this isn't yoga. This isn't about a particular performance of a pose, okay? This is about activating the channels. Now, when you come back to starting position, you're gonna feel and observe, okay? Now we bring ourselves down to the floor. Take your time coming down to the floor, and I'm gonna give 2 variations of the earth face stretch. One will be the one that you see in the picture. It involves a lot of weight on the calves, the tops of the feet, the squeeze of the knees. This is not accessible for everybody, okay? If this is accessible for you, the goal here, these channels run on the front part of the body, especially the stomach and spleen channels run on either side of the quadricep muscles, and then spleen channel will come up here. Stomach channel will just keep on going all the way to the eye, very long channel. And both those channels also come down to the feet. So we want to stretch now on the front part of the body. I'm feeling all the way through. Now, some of you, you'll be able to lay down. That's amazing. It's really more about activating that front part of the body. Now, for most of us, we may find comfort in a variation that looks like a low lunge. Okay? Now, I have a pillow close by just in case I need extra padding on this lower knee. But what I'm going to do is have my front leg at 90 degrees, not more. You know, if we're in yoga, we have these lunges where we really power up and go forward. Not here. Here, we tilt the hips. My left knee is down, so my left arm comes straight up, and I'm looking for the same activation of this front part of the body. Breathe there. Stomach and spleen channels. Earth phase. We met these channels as we explored the worry of grief. Let's try the other leg. 3 to 5 slow breaths. Feel into the front body. Now, if you were doing the traditional stretch, knees stay together, knees stay on the floor, you might like to follow that with a child's pose. And all of us might like to follow this one with a child's pose because child's pose feels good. Keep in mind, knees could go wide. You can make space for bellies and boobs. You could also stack forearm. And especially after this intense stretch, that feels really nice for the low back. Okay, water face stretch. Now, I'm going to use this pillow. And I'm going to sit right on the edge with my legs outstretched. I'm giving my hips a little bit of space so that I can help tilt forward. It's totally fine if you're going to have a micro bend in your knees. Also, you don't have to reach the feet. If you can reach the feet, that's great. And if you can reach the feet and reach this pressure point that's right at the base of, so this is the ball mount of the foot, so toes, base of toes, ball mount of the foot. This is kidney 1. You can kind of press that pressure point. It's not a have to. What are we after? A stretch, activation from the soles of the feet all the way up the backs of the legs, all the way up the back of the spine, all the way to where the bladder channel originates, which is right at the eyes. And so the bladder channel traces these parallel lines all the way down the spine, and then it branches out. And one branch is the kidney channel, so it'll come the inside, and then the bladder channel will go straight down the middle of the hamstring, the middle of the knee, the middle of the calf, and eventually ends up at the tip of the pinky toe. It's one of the longest channels in the body. So what are we after? We want to feel that sense of activation through the whole back body, not just the back, the back body. So we breathe in, we stretch up. We breathe out, and to the best of our ability, reach forward. Little stretch, and breathe. Keep breathing. Let's say we're not at the toes, but we're here. And just want to throw out, let's breathe and stretch up. The possibility of a variation here is legs up the wall. So if that's something that you know already, that could be a fun one. Okay, let's come wide leg. Here we are at the wood channels. Liver, inner thigh, gallbladder, outer body, ribs, side of the neck, side of the head. Big long channel there too. First one, liver, we breathe in, we exhale forward, and we're just activating right that middle adductors, inner thigh muscles. Breathe here. And inhale all the way back up, stretch the arms up. We're going to take a side bend, either one arm on top of the thigh or to the inside. Stretch to the side and really enjoy this sense of openness as you breathe into the side body. Sides of the arms, sides of the ribs, sides of the hips. Inhale up. Exhale to the opposite side. So again, it's not about what this looks like. It's all about what it feels like. You're going to inhale all the way back up, and if it's comfortable, we'll bring ourselves down onto the floor into Shavasana, corpse pose. Could be knees are bent because that's going to be supportive for your low back. Could be that you have something you could bring under your knees to support the back. Also, when we're thinking about being supportive for the water phase, we need warmth, blankets, cozy things. I love this trend this year of all these cozy fuzzy jackets. We're going to do a short micro nidra today. And so we're going to, I think I've got a little competition here. I was going to put a little soundscape, but I think my son's...
Nothing, just go into your...
Can you turn the Bluetooth off on your thing right away?
Yeah, I just did.
Thank you so much. Okay, close the door, lovely. Close the door, please. That's some real life right there, y'all. We'll give this one more try. Okay, so if it's comfortable for you, close your eyes. If it's more comfortable for you to keep your eyes open, no problem. Perhaps letting your gaze just gently soften. And from here, I want you to bring your mind into your breath. I think Mercury was gone straight. Bring your mind to your breath. Breath is in the belly, deep inhales, and as you exhale, you're melting. As if you were the ice block that is now melting, melting into the floor, into your chair, into the sofa, the bed, wherever you find yourself right now. And give that little bit of sound as you exhale, a soft moan, inhaling. Exhale. Breathing in. And as you breathe out. Nice low tone sound. Let yourself be the ship adjusting itself under the changing weight and pressure of the ocean itself. And then if in the meantime, tech friends, I could have that slide with the poem up, that would be so helpful. And so just bring your mind to the back body, your body resting here on the floor, and just observe how you are so heavy in relaxation. And then just bring that into the front part of the body, that same heaviness of relaxation in the front part of the body. Bring that sense of the surrender, the moan, the groan of relaxation in the right side of the body and into the left side of the body. Same thing in the top of the body, crown of the head. The same into the feet below. Just feel this body, this relaxed puddle, this whole body. And just as we've observed the heaviness in the body, there's also lightness in the body. Observe a quality of lightness throughout the body, perhaps in the joint spaces, perhaps all around the body. Lightness anywhere and everywhere. And just notice that this body experiences heaviness and lightness at the same time. Keep in mind, if this is a challenge, you could be in any position. You could be lying on your side, and perhaps you feel like crawling into that fetal ball, curled up, safe and sound. Allow your own intuition to be your guide here of the best place for you to be, and to be with your breath. To be in this moment of relaxation, acknowledging that this grief process, creating a soft shelter for the sorrow of grief, requires a deep amount of rest. Restfulness to visit the ancestors, restfulness for our dreams, restfulness for our nightmares, restfulness for change, and restfulness so that we may find the constant in our day. This human experience, often a myriad of pleasant and unpleasant feelings. Just know that this restful space is yours for healing. And I just give us a little poetic medicine, a little something for the ears at the end of this short relaxation in the form of a very well-known poem. by the great author Maya Angelou. And this is her very famous poem, Caged Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. On the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. And so as you emerge gently from this relaxation, know that all the resources you need are living within this body. We just have to remember how to access them. And so I conclude this webinar inviting you into considering grief as a superpower and to try out these practices on your own. And the next time you come, let us know how they go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoli. It's always a beautiful pleasure. And I've started doing these every morning. I don't know if other people have, but I've started my practice, after I do my meditation and my chanting, I do this one.
Yes, the jiggle, jiggle, wiggle, wiggle.
Yeah, the wiggle, wiggle. And then the stretches that or the movements that you've suggested. And I had a question, which is, the ones that are sitting down, can you do those standing up? Is it the same, or, to get the same benefit?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like if you touch your toes.
Sure, if you did a standing forward bend, yes, because it's really about bringing your mind to the back body.
Right.
Breathing into that space, because wherever the mind goes, the chi goes, the energy goes in the body. So it's really just more about these are stretches that help us access these fascial planes in the body, but they're absolutely not limited to just these 5-6 stretches that I'm sharing with you.
I was thinking like this one too, standing up, like
totally.
Are you yeah. So I just thought it gives people some creativity, because sometimes, in terms of just working with their own, I just wondered, because sometimes I do it that way.
So wide leg forward bend sitting in a chair.
Yeah, that's what, because sometimes.
Right? Like you can just come right to the edge of that chair, get really wide and fold forward, right? So it's really just about, like, that's why I'm on repeat with the principle.
Right.
The principle is there. It doesn't matter how you get there.
Cool. Thank you. And I just wanted to notice that Yesenia put in the chat, I think this was even right before in the Yoga Nidra, that it's difficult for her. Yeah. So can you speak to that, the difficulty of this because it seems like on the one hand, it might seem simple, but I know that it is challenging for a lot of people. So can you just give a little bit of.
And the challenges can be so different. And we don't know what specifically was difficult, but that was at the moment of our relaxation. And when we are, cranked up, when we're wound up from the day, from the emotions, from the pandemic, from e-learning, whatever it is. Yeah, it's not easy to just simply lay down and like, oh, I'm going to be totally relaxed now. Like, no, it's this unwinding
Right.
process. And so meeting the difficulty is part of the process. The difficulty will teach you more than just arriving and the pleasantness of the moment.
Yeah.
Because again, it's about a transformative process. So, also speaking to physical limitations, that's why you are the most wise person about your body. And so, it's really about you adapting and adjusting, taking in the principles. So, what was the principle of the metal stretch?
Mhm.
Was to open up and stretch through the channels. We don't need to do that big old fancy, forward bending move. Maybe you just ate like a huge meal, maybe you just had a baby. Like there's all sorts of reasons why, right? And similarly, it's about the principle.
Right. And the intention. I love that. I mean, I remember when I took my Kundalini yoga teacher training, the principle was that you get the full benefit of any exercise by virtue of leaning towards it or into it, or like with your intention, the mind's intention for it. So
Yeah,
very
but
cool.
I would definitely say in this case, we're intention as
As
awareness.
awareness. But that's what you were saying in terms of like the different stretch. If you're bringing your mind to it, like that's what I thought of intention,
Yeah.
is bringing the mind to something.
Yes.
Okay, so Tammy says she used to be a dancer for 25 years. Not being able to even bend her knees now breaks her heart. Um, and Anna says it was a good stretching. So join us tomorrow with Ruben Mabubi will be here. Holistic protection, keeping yourself and your family safe. It's the first of, I think, a 5-part series, and it'll be the introduction. And then on Wednesday, Guy and a number of our new staff from Be Strong Families are going to be talking about welcoming newcomers and beginning work relationships during the pandemic. Because I think a lot of us have that experience, either being new at a new job or meeting people virtually and working with them virtually during the pandemic. Tunja will be here again on Thursday. I think, God willing, that Mississippi's power situation is a little bit resolved, because they were having huge ice storms and that was blocking her connectivity. But hopefully Tunja will be back on Thursday. And then Alexandra and I are going to do a webinar on Friday on framing the narrative of Black history. This is in the closing out Black History Celebration Month. It's just like, and this is covering the questions of who writes history and how does history, what kind of story is history, and how can the way we tell the story and who tells the story change what the message is. So join us. It will be like kind of a little bit of a meta conversation, but fun for everybody. And I think we have to skip to the just go now because it's 1:02. So, and we have to make room for the next slide. But wear your mask and contact me if you want to do a webinar. And thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Yoli. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.